How could anybody doing voiceover justify spending $2,000, $3,000, or $4,000 on a high-end preamp? Why are they so cool? What do they do? And what do they add to a voiceover recording? Well, I'm going to show you. I'm Lenny B, voiceover audio engineer. Let's make your voice sound better. There's a pretty good chance that you have a great preamp in your audio interface, whether it's a Focusrite or an Audient or an SSL. They have what's called clean preamps, and it just amplifies the signal of your low-level microphone, amplifies that signal, and makes it something that's big and bold and loud enough for your software to understand and be able to manipulate. But there are a lot of people who they choose to add an additional preamp, and some of them can get pretty pricey, and a lot of them are modeled after some of the classic hardware units, and they can range in price from about $400, $500, $600 all the way up to $2,000 or $3,000, several $1,000s. Why are they so cool? Well, let me show you what a preamp actually does. And to really explain this, we need to talk about saturation, because you've heard me talk about it in some of the videos. If you subscribe to the channel, you've seen me use soft tube saturation. I use this a lot, and I always say how it thickens up the sound of a voice. And I'm going to show you exactly how it does it. When I first saw this, I'm like, whoa, I get it now, the visual. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a test tone. And this tone is only going to give you an example of the voice that's running through a system. And so that's 250 hertz. Ooh, I don't know what pitch that is, but it all associates with a pitch. And you go all the way up the spectrum, right? So this is just a test tone, and we're using this to replicate a very specific pitch that our voices would make when we're recording. All right, let's shut it off. But I want you to see it's a sine wave, and it's a very clean wave, so we're able to just look, okay, let's hear what that sound, that frequency sounds like. So we've got a test tone. It's running through the meter, which is the top one. This is the input. This is the output at the bottom. And then I'm going to add this soft tube saturator, and then it's running through the Pro Q3 by FabFilter, which has a, they call it a spectrum analyzer, which allows us to visually see which frequencies are being triggered and what's apparent, what frequencies are apparent in the audio path. So when we turn that back on, you can see as I cycle up the pitch, it's showing you know what tone that is in the frequency analyzer of the EQ. And then when you use an EQ, you're actually raising or attenuating specific frequency areas in the spectrum of your audio. So just to give you an idea of what we're looking at here, let me take that one off. Okay, so what we do is when you have a tone and you've got your voice, and I'm sorry if your dog is listening and getting annoyed by the tone, he'd really be upset by that. So let's just look at 250, and we've got a 0 level going in, a 0 level coming out. And when I add, I'm gonna turn on the soft tube. Okay, what we're doing is we're only adding saturation, and this is all going to make sense when we get down to a preamp. But when you add saturation, look what it does. When I say it thickens up the audio, all I'm doing is adding a little saturation, and watch what happens. You add some saturation. What happens is that tone is still the same, but you can hear it thicker, and you can visually see that it's adding even and odd harmonics. That's what these are called. This is the color, and this is what it does to the audio. I'll take it off again. Just listen to the difference, and I'll shut my mouth so you can hear it. That's without it. That's the pure tone, and we'll slowly add it again. You could listen. Now what happens is the volume ends up increasing, so we would have to lower the output of this. But I just wanted you to understand and see, let's shut it off, understand and see that it actually thickens the sound. It adds material to the sound. It's not just that tone. So imagine what that can do to your voice. It actually thickens up pieces and parts of the different tone in your voice. So how do we relate that, and what does that mean in terms of a preamp? Well, a preamp and the hardware units, they have either tubes or transformers that add those same kind of harmonics. So when somebody says, oh, I just got this killer preamp, and you'll see some preamps just have an input and an output knob, that's what they're doing. you are adding harmonic content to actually thicken up of the voice. This is very apparent, and you can associate it with a guitar amplifier. Those are tube preamps in some of the tube guitar amplifiers, and when you raise the gain and you drive the signal into the tube amp, the more you drive, the more it adds subharmonic information, and eventually, if you drive it hard enough, it turns into a distortion. And it's not to be confused with an overs distortion, like if your input level is too high. This is a saturation and a distortion of the harmonics. And in recording of music and vocals and guitar and keyboards and drums, that type of distortion can be pleasing and add a warmth and a compression kind of sound to it as well. It's been described as that too. So understand, adding a preamp into your system, it doesn't just allow you to get a more gain and more volume. And preamps actually add content and add sound to your voice. It's one of the only things that can add material to your voice, whereas a compressor or an EQ will actually remove material and filter things out. So instead of the soft tube, let's take a look at one of the other plugins that I use and talk about often, which is the Waves Scheps Omni Channel. Andrew Scheps is a award-winning producer for albums that you've heard of. He's one of the guys behind the scenes, behind the mixer board, and he's worked with Waves to put this together. I love this because it has such great processors. It's a multi-processor unit all in one, and I think it's like $38 or something on the Waves website. So I really do. I use this a lot, and it helps me. I love the way the EQ sounds and whatever. So I could go on and on about this. There's a 10% off coupon code that I have, and I'll put it in the description of this video if you want to get this and add it to your plugin collection. But let's take a look at this preamp and the first part of this plugin, the Scheps Omni Channel. It has a preamp which adds saturation, and what I want to do is I want to show you the difference between this saturation from the soft tubes and this saturation, and we can see it visually. So let's light up that test tone again. And so with the soft tube, you can see that looks a certain way, and it's adding, as you increase the gain, it's adding different parts of the harmonic, subharmonic content. And now let's do the same thing with the Scheps. So I've shut off the soft tube, and let's raise. We want to be able to see this at the same time here. Let me see. Let's make it a little smaller so you can see it. All right, we're going to raise the saturation on this particular preamp, and we'll raise it slowly. And you'll see that looks very different. It also has different flavors. This is odd harmonics, this is even harmonics, and then it has a heavy harmonics, which is, I think, both. And they all look different. Okay, what's the point here? What are we getting at? And the reason why I want to show you this is the saturation is different from preamp to preamp, and that's why some people may love the sound of the Manly Vox Box, because that has a specific type of saturation that it adds. It has a sound. It has a color, they call it. That's how they describe it. The soft tube saturation has a particular color and a sound to it. So when you add saturation and add the thickness from specific preamps, you're adding a different style and a different color and a different feel. Some preamps sound better on some sources than others. So what's awesome about plugins is you're able to play with this stuff and get an idea of what that saturation and what that preamp sounds like without having to buy the huge unit for several $1,000s. And one of the ones that is very sought after in the voiceover world is the Avalon 737. The hardware is near $3,000 if you actually want to buy the rack mount unit for this, but Universal Audio has it in this software version, which is awesome because it sounds so similar, and they've modeled every little intricate detail to be just like the hardware unit. But if you are working in the Universal Audio Apollo universe, you're able to access this and use it. Now, before we start, I want to tell you and just explain one thing. What happens when you increase, and we saw this a little bit earlier, when you increase the gain and drive the tube to get that saturation, you're also increasing the volume. So that's why a lot of preamps, and most of them, will have, they either have an auto feature, or they'll have an input and an output, input gain and output level. So as you increase the input gain on a preamp and get that saturation, you're going to need to dial back the output gain. And this is also common on units like the DBX 286S. It has a preamp and other features in it as well, but you'll notice there's an input and an output knob, and that's the reason why they have that, because you want to match. You want to make sure that the signal level coming in is equivalent to the signal level coming out, no matter what you do, adding saturation or whatever, adding EQ or adding whatever. So that's why I'm going to be looking closely at my input and output meters here. So let's start the tone, and you can see the level coming in is the same as the level coming out. So as I'm going to turn this gain all the way down, and I'll turn it on. And as I turn the gain up, slowly turning up, you'll see the saturation, and you'll see the color and the visual until I get to 0. Actually, it's a little bit more on the output meter. So now we're matched. And this is very different from the other saturation that we saw, right? The visual is different. It's got this high part saturation that wasn't apparent in some of the other ones, which gives it a different tone and a different sound. As I increase the gain, the output level and the overall volume of what this unit is doing is going up. So then we go to this here, the output meter, and turn it back down. So I'm already almost at 0 because I need to crank this up pretty high for you to visually see. And just because we're this high and you're seeing this saturation content, if I lower it, that doesn't mean that it's not there. A lot of times it's important to understand that adding saturation with a preamp is a very minimal process. If you add just a little saturation, it ends up doing a lot to the voice. So it doesn't have to. So if I were to add, let's say, just this much saturation, and I'm only driving the gain this much, I would need to go to my output and try to match that output gain, which is there. So now I'm adding saturation. If I want a little more, now my output meter is way too high. I'm going to have to back that down. There we go, to 0 again. So that's the idea behind saturation and how a preamp adds material to your voiceover, and that's why they're so cool. And that's what a lot of people know in the music industry and the production of music and bands. It's really cool to hear what this sounds like on a drum set. It's really cool what saturation sounds like and what it can do to a bass guitar, for instance. Or if you hear an incredible vocal in some of the amazing recordings, that is part of what's contributing to that sound, is the preamps and the saturation. Once I saw visually what adding saturation and harmonic content does, once I saw that visually, what it can do for a voice, it was kind of eye-opening. And I go, okay, now I get it. Now I see why some people can justify spending thousands of dollars on a preamp, or even a couple $100 on a great preamp modeled plug-in. I see the value of it now, and I hope it's helped you and kind of given you some more toys to play with. Really, adding saturation is just another way to optimize the sound of a voice. A reminder to hit up my website if you're looking for free tips or free techniques for voiceover recording. I also have training courses for sale there on EQ and other voice production processes. I think your voiceover sound should inspire you. If you love the sound of your voice when you're recording for voiceover, and you love the tone and you love the quality that you're getting, it's just going to drive you to do more and do better and be more creative. So let's make your voice sound better. I'm Lenny B, audio engineer. Thanks for watching.